Oasis Audio presents Night Driving by Addie Zierman, read for you by Jamie Draper. Introduction to a Winter Road Trip, February 2014. If you remember this trip at all, it will be in the blurred sounds of Disney DVDs against the rough highway. You'll remember it like the sun streaking orange through the windows of our minivan, sitting warm and heavy on your laps like a purring striped tabby. Maybe you'll remember fragments of these long days, the sun-bleached backs of dozens of baby alligators piled on top of one another like lumber in that restaurant lagoon in Georgia. The seashells you lined up along a worn bath towel on a stranger's guest bathroom sink. The rough beauty of those pine cones you gathered from that farm forest in North Carolina, hand in hand with a woman you will likely have forgotten by now. Maybe you'll remember nothing, but you'll be tricked into thinking that you remember because of the pictures you'll see through the years, photographs turned into half-imagined memories in your still solidifying minds. That shot of the two of you standing ankle-deep in the restless blue of the Atlantic. The one of you with the giant plastic roadside elephants. That hastily taken selfie of me, 30 years old, pantomiming a shout of enthusiasm as we entered Florida. The two of you asleep in your car seats behind me for the first time all day. For the record, here's what happened. During the February of 2014, we left our home in Minnesota for no good reason at all and drove south. Dane, you were 4. Liam, 2. You won't remember the few wiry gray hairs that began shooting out of my parted blonde hair that winter, but I do. 10.5 years married, mama of 2, running away from it all. I stood in front of the streaked bathroom mirror, pulling at the grays, one sharp, swift tug after another. Liam, you stood below me, carefully brushing my blue jeans with a Walmart hairbrush. In the face-magnifying mirror on the wall, I could see the crow's feet sprawling outward from my eyes and that worry line fixed stubbornly between my eyebrows. You called them eye-browns then. My worry line you called an ouchie. The woman standing in the halo of those halogen lights felt to me like a watermark, a ghost. Some streaky, half-realized version of the person I imagined I'd be by now. Whole, happy. One of those fun moms, with a smile on her face and a spring in her step and lots of ideas for macaroni-based crafts. Instead, I felt stripped bare as a tree branch, brittle and sharp and falling apart. Still, after all this time. Will you remember this? The mornings I stumbled out of bed only after you'd poked and tugged and hollered and I couldn't ignore you anymore? I lay on the couch in bleach-stained yoga pants and a ratty sweatshirt, hair piled sloppily at the nape of my neck, and I let one PBS Kids show bleed into another all day long. I read, or didn't, cleaned, or didn't. You wanted to play in the snow, but I couldn't manage to work myself up to it, so I lugged the bikes and riding toys into the house instead, and you rode them back and forth from the front door to the patio door, leaving salt streaks on the wood floors. You were slamming into things and leaving bits of drywall and paint in the corners and scars in the walls, whooping and laughing and unaware. At night, I fixed your dinner, then stood behind the counter and filled my wine glass to the brim with cheap Cabernet. You ate your grapes and picked at your tacos and elbowed each other and whined about the vegetables. Be kind to each other, I told you. And you couldn't have known what was happening, really, when I drained the glass all the way to the bottom in a few smooth motions and then filled it to the top again. You couldn't have guessed at the small, terrifying ways that I felt myself giving up. After the third time school was closed in our district for freezing wind chills, I began to trace a route from Minnesota to Florida on a map with my index finger. By then, we'd had 47 days of below-zero temperatures in our suburban Minnesota town. The coldest winter in a generation, the weathermen were saying, and I believed them. That week, I created a new document titled Epic Winter Road Trip, where I calculated the time it would take us to get to Florida and listed the names of friends and family and acquaintances we might be able to crash with along the way. Minnesota to Buffalo Grove, Illinois, where my parents lived. 6 hours, 15 minutes. Buffalo Grove to Indy, 3 hours, 15 minutes. Indy to Nashville, 4 hours, 36 minutes. And although the trip had been more of a vague hypothetical than anything until that point, seeing it laid out like that in sans serif, even with a question mark after it, was something of a decision in and of itself. Once I saw that it could theoretically be done, there was nothing to stop me from doing it. I would load you up into our van and pull out of our driveway, and the three of us would merge into the throng of American road trippers working their way across the continental United States. We would go for all the usual reasons that people go, and for a few reasons that I didn't have the courage to admit, even to myself. Mostly those reasons had to do with the darkness that pressed down on my partly healed places, making my heart throb painfully, reminding me of the ways I had almost ruined everything about this time a half-dozen years ago. The ways I still could. Nashville to Atlanta, 4 hours, 15 minutes. Atlanta to Florida, 6 hours, 13 minutes. Once we got down there, nothing much mattered. I believed in that sparkling romance movie way that Florida would heal us. After that, who cared? It was just a matter then of getting home again, and I imagined that it would be nice to head back up the southern East Coast to the Carolinas to wander among the pastel beauty that I pictured to be Savannah. "You're so brave," the clerk at the Dollar Tree told me a week later when I explained what all the little toys and treats were for. Emergency boredom busters for the car. I planned to wrap them up and pass them to the two of you along the way to keep you from killing each other. "Going all that way by yourself?" She shook her head, and loopy Dollar Tree earrings jangled against her sallow, blush-dusted cheeks. "I got to that age, and I would never do that." "Brave," the dental hygienist said a few days later. I'd chipped a front tooth trying to force a needle through sticky-backed Velcro with my teeth and had to be finagled into the dentist's schedule before we hit the road. "What were you trying to make?" the hygienist had asked, peering over the top of her white mask into my broken smile. "Lap desks for my kids to use in the car. Probably should have just bought them off Amazon instead." I rolled my eyes at myself then, and she laughed, and I explained the road trip, and she'd said, "Brave." It was all so amicably conversational that I could almost pretend that there wasn't something darkly obsessive about the way I was trying to force together disjointed pieces of fabric and vinyl and sticky-backed Velcro, trying to create something perfect. "I remember ages 2 and 4, the dentist said over the sound of grinding enamel a few minutes later as he sanded down the pointy groove I'd made in the tooth. The metal of his grinding tool tasted sour, or maybe it was the acrid taste of my own front tooth. "There we go," he said, peering in for a closer look, and I couldn't see much of his face behind the green surgical mask and the glinting overhead lamp aimed at my mouth, but I think he was smiling when he added, "You're one brave lady." "Thanks," I slurred at him through the gargling static of hose and spit sucker, not sure even as I accepted the approving awe whether bravery was the right word for any of it. My heart is not, in the end, cut from an adventurous, seafaring kind of cloth. I am, generally speaking, a homebody, content with very little adventure in my life. I chose this trip not because I am brave, but because I was desperate. The two of you were wild and forgiving innocents that winter. You jumped from the couches to the coffee table in your matching Spider-Man pajamas, your laughter bouncing off the vaulted walls of our living room like a dozen ping-pong balls. And the way out of the darkness has always, for me, started with telling the truth. It starts with saying where I am, what I need, and then moving resolutely toward the light. "We're going on a trip," I told you at bedtime, Dane, a few nights before we left. Liam, you were already asleep in the room next door, your face covered lightly with your blue crocheted blanket. You were too young to understand. In your life at age 2, you were simply along for the ride. "We're going to stay at a lot of friends' houses, and it's going to take a long time, but at the end, we'll be at the beach." I smoothed your bath-softened hair as you lay on the bottom bunk of your bed, surrounded by stuffed animals staring at me wide-eyed. "The beach?" "Yes," I said, "and we'll find lots of shells." "Cool," you'd said, your speech already slurred with sleep, looking at me through those half-closed blue eyes. And how could I tell you 60 hours in the car? I didn't really understand it myself at that point, and hours and minutes weren't the ways you measured life in those days anyway. I didn't tell you 3,000 miles. I told you instead to fill up your backpacks with your favorite toys, to give your daddy a big hug and a kiss, and to say goodbye to the dog. It didn't seem to me like I was tearing you out of the fabric of your daily life, though of course I was. But it was only 2 weeks. It was an adventure. And if anyone looked unsure as I packed up the last of the bags in the car, I didn't see it. I only saw the road stretching forward towards some blurry pastel tableau of hope. In the back of the minivan, I hung a mesh laundry bag and stacked a half-dozen carefully labeled totes full of clothes. For Chicago, for Indy, for Nashville. Next to them sat 2 cardboard boxes filled with copies of my first book to sell at readings that I'd scheduled haphazardly along the way. I had packed our swimming stuff in a blue vinyl IKEA bag, lined up your shoes underneath the seats, and hooked your coats over each of your armrests. On the passenger seat, I piled snacks, Aldi brand chips in sealed individual bags, Sunbelt granola bars, Ninja Turtle fruit snacks, those fluorescent orange cheese crackers with the peanut butter sandwiched between them. Next to those, there was the box of wrapped dollar store gifts and teetering stacks of library CDs and DVDs. I balanced the iHome on the dash, since our Craigslist found Honda Odyssey wasn't pimped out enough to include an iPod adapter jack. There was dark chocolate in the compartment on the driver's side door. The phone in one cup holder, the travel coffee mug in the other. "Who's ready?" I shouted as we backed out of the driveway and toward the road. You didn't answer. You were too zoned into the DVD players in front of your eyeballs, strapped into your seats, heading away from home for longer than you could have understood. In the rearview mirror, a gray hair twanged like a spring from the winter static. And who knows if you'll remember any of this. The movies, the coats, the dollar store gifts passed back into your small open hands. My foot on the gas pedal, tearing toward the beach at 78 miles per hour, because when you find yourself stuck in the cold, terrifying dark, sometimes the only way forward that you can see is to climb into that salt-streaked minivan and drive as fast as you can toward the light at the end of the ocean.